Thanks, Ryan, for having us, and thank you for, I know there were 3 sessions to choose from, so thank you for choosing ours. We're going to make it worth your while. My name is Packy McCormick. I'm going to be the moderator today. More importantly, we have an incredible panel lined up to talk about the future of manufacturing. To get us started, I think let's just go down the line, maybe tell us a little bit about your background, the company that you're building now, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I guess I'll start. I'm number 2 here in the line. Ironically, aerospace physics engineering was my educational. Spent about 10 years in that sector, and then went to a CAE, computer-aided engineering company, where ironically I met many of the people who are here at Arkestro, because that led to Ariba, and of course many of the Ariba people are here part of Arkestro. So in between that, I became a pilot, started a company called Exojet, which became the 3rd largest business jet operator in the country, and did a recent stint at the State Department and back in aerospace. We are building a business jet again, but it happens to be an incredibly efficient business jet. Uses about 70% less fuel, and we use a new type of fuel called biofuel, or SAF, and it has near 0 emissions. So.
Unbelievable. And if you haven't checked out the website, I watched the video a couple days ago. It's incredibly cool. It's flying now, so we're moving.
Yeah, interesting looking plane.
Yeah. Satish.
Hi, good afternoon, guys. Born in India, mechanical engineer by education. If you don't know Indians, if you are not an engineer or a doctor, you cease to exist for the family. So that's how I became a mechanical engineer. Spent most of my time semiconductors, worked in multiple countries, you name it, in Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Malaysia, Japan, Singapore, China. Kind of accident ended up with Bloom Energy. I didn't know the company at all. Somebody sent me a 60-minute interview of our CEO. I was really impressed with the mission of the company. I joined about 3 years ago and loving every day of it. Thank you.
Awesome. Nice to meet you all. I'm the last-minute addition to the panel. My name is Salman. I'm the CEO of a company called Formic. Just kind of a little bit by way of background, I'm in the technology world. I built and sold 2 technology businesses, and then I spent roughly the last 10 years as a venture capitalist investing in the intersection of AI and machine learning with the physical world. So investing in AI for manufacturing and construction and healthcare and biotech and agriculture. About 2 years ago, I left the world of investing to start another business. Formic is what it's called. It's from, if any of you have read the book Ender's Game, it's this kind of sci-fi novel where there's alien monsters that take over the world. That's what we named the company after. But it's much less nefarious. What we're doing is creating a robot workforce for every factory in America. You could think of us a little bit like a robot staffing agency. We put robots in by the hour in all kinds of factories. We do things like palletizing, machine tending, welding, inspection, case packing, kind of you name it, anything that a factory might need. We go in and help fill the empty headcount that probably many of your manufacturing businesses are facing. So we're only 2 years old as a business, but we're growing pretty quickly. We're about 80 people now, so still a baby company compared to the other folks on this panel.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is David Schultz. I met some of you before and so forth. Very happy to be on this panel. I graduated as a chemical engineer and worked for GE for 13 years, and that was a great learning experience. And then after that, I went into the med device industry, worked for Boston Scientific and some other med device companies, and then started my own business after that. Built that for about 14 years and sold it when Jabil bought Nipro. I sold my business to them. And then actually traveled around the world teaching transition military service men and women entrepreneurship in a program called Boots to Business, which was quite rewarding. And then my shortest commute at that point was from Boston to Frankfurt. So it took about 2 years to say, hey, it's amazing, but there's a little bit of wear and tear there. So I came back and looked for some other things that maybe would interest me and got involved back into the world of supply chain and so forth. And now I work for a contract manufacturer and doing a lot of the different work in supply chain. And I will say I have never worked for Ariba.
Well, I always love to be the dumbest person in any room that I'm in, and so this panel, I think, is making me feel right at home. To kick off, I feel like 2011, Mark Andreessen wrote this piece, Software is Eating the World. The past decade has been this decade of software companies getting to multi-billion, $100 billion valuations. And it feels like over the past few years, and really now, there's been this kind of swing back towards companies building in the physical world. I guess, Paul, we can start with you. Why do you think we're seeing that? And what are the hardest parts about building a startup in an established kind of physical industry?
Well, I can answer that a little bit. There's aviation and aerospace is going through a bit of a renaissance right now. As you all know, it started, 1903, and then it went through a kind of a renaissance period for the first 30, 40 years. Big innovation was happening and so forth, and then it just became very expensive. And now it's going through another innovation with electric flying aircraft, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and then new technologies that are coming out, fly-by-wire. In our case, we're using laminar flow, trying to do it sustainable. So I think in our industry, there's sort of a big current of just new technology that's worth investing in.
And when do I get my flying car? My favorite book of this year is called Where is My Flying Car? When do we get our flying cars?
2025.
Wow, you heard it here first. How about in the energy space?
I think there's not just energy space, but also overall there is a disruption in technology that is happening, right? If you look at 10 years ago, there was phone and there was laptops and computers, and there was a major focus on the software to go build software and apps that make these devices work. Now, if you see there is a pivot towards this disruptive technology, take electric cars. It's a completely new paradigm in manufacturing, in supply chain, also in energy sector. A lot of people want to go to clean energy. It's a completely different manufacturing process. So you naturally see this trend where you pivot towards the companies that are very manufacturing intensive. Of course, given the fact that the new geopolitical situation also doesn't help, so everybody wants self-reliance. I think that is what is happening. You'll see this trend probably for another 5 to 6 years, and then we'll go back into software side, I think.
That makes a lot of sense. Saman, I just wrote about Formic the other day, so I know this is going to be a very good answer, but I'd love in particular to hear, as we're talking about this topic, just how you looked at the industry when you started and where you decided to kind of fit Formic into everything that was going on in manufacturing.
Yeah, I think the topic of how technology is impacting the physical world is one that I've spent the last 10 years or so thinking about, because as an investor, that's really where I spent a lot of energy. I think one of the conclusions I came to is that for the last, let's say, kind of 20 years, a lot of software and technology has been around the idea of information technology, and that information technology can only really get you so far. It basically routes human behavior, like, we could do kind of automated advertising and content recommendation and some kind of information flow. But ultimately, there's only so much efficiency that you can squeeze out of better coordination through information sharing. It's really the physical world where most of our existence takes place, and that's really where there's a lot of room for efficiency gains. I think the thing that a lot of technology companies, including my company, have realized is that the technology is only one part of that stack. And unless you can provide a full solution, the technology is usually not that meaningful. So take the example of robotics, which is the world we work in. There's been, for the last 10 years, many robotics companies that have built many new types of robots that do a lot of new and interesting things. But when you look at adoption of that technology, it's very, very low. And I think most manufacturing businesses have none or very few robots in their facilities. And I think a big part of the reason is because nobody really provides a full end-to-end solution. And so I think what we're seeing is in kind of industry after industry after industry, people who sold electric motors weren't particularly successful. It wasn't until somebody came and built a fully electric car that you saw adoption take off. Or with solar, solar selling the panels by themselves wasn't very successful. But when companies like Sunrun came around and built kind of full end-to-end services around solar energy, you got a lot more adoption. And I think the same is happening with robotics. And so I think why now, I think, is it's because a lot of the people who came from the technology industry are now starting to kind of cross-pollinate with people who are very experienced in their own worlds and building these hybrid businesses that are technology companies that also have the DNA of whatever industry they're coming from. So I think it's a pretty exciting time to be in the technology world.
Yeah, I would just add that I think robotics is really a great example of that. We're putting a lot of robotics in ourselves. And at this stage right now, and I think a lot of it has to do with the business model. So these are subscription robots. And I think there's an integration of the business model and the physical model and the IoT and things of that nature, because now they're affordable in many ways. And there are situations where you can utilize them maybe for a short period of time on a project and so on. So it makes it really helpful. And then I think, of course, with the big challenges with resources and human resources and so forth, they don't take PTO, no vacation, benefits and things like that. They really don't have a conversation about when it's a robot, versus a human being. So I do think it's the integration of the business model as well, making it affordable and things of that nature for that. But I do think that from a physical standpoint, there was a big lull in that. There was a huge investment in technology, over the last decade and so on. There's a lot of nearshoring and things like that, and people are seeing big opportunities in those areas.
Yeah, I completely agree. I guess just kind of going back to that one for a second, when you're looking at talent now, are you seeing a lot of kind of refugees from the regular software industry who want to go get their hands dirty and build physical things again? I feel like the more people that I talk to, the more want to go out and build something. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
Oh, you're definitely seeing a piece of that. People being able to get their hands on something, in our particular case, fly it.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool, for sure.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, so we'll move on to the next one, and we're getting closer and closer to Arkestro here, which is, what's the role of supply chain in your innovation and planning cycles, and why is procurement a strategic function at your company? And David, we'll start with you this time.
Sure. I think sort of a lost art on this one is what is called the S&OP process, sales and operations planning. And I think it's something that is really effective, but it's not used in a lot of the organizations. And I see from a supply chain standpoint, we're getting much more upfront with the whole commercial side of the business. And it's starting with that, what's the forecast and so forth, and coming all the way down to, what are the needs and making sure that we're not stocked out, continuity of supply and things of that nature. So having a very solid S&OP process, I think, is really, really important. And I think the last 2 years have just made it really clear. People talk about, you need to get a seat at the table. And I always say, you have to earn a seat at the table. No one's just going to give you that seat. But I think folks are realizing now that it's required to have the folks from the back end of the business and the manufacturing speaking and understanding what the forecasts are to make sure that trickles all the way down to the business. So the S&OP process, to me, is something that needs to be revived. And the executive S&OP process, like on a once-a-month standpoint from the CEO and their staff, is really important to keep a business running smoothly.
Go ahead, Saman.
Yeah, I think from a supply chain perspective, I think one of the things we're seeing is a lot of our customers are manufacturing facilities that make product for, in either food and beverage or automotive or aerospace. And all of them are facing severe shortages, both them and their customers ultimately. One of the things that we've found is that the typical factory in America only runs about 2,000 to 3,000 hours per year. Out of 8,700 possible production hours. And so what that means is, every forklift, every air conditioner, every CNC machine ends up sitting idle for up to 75% of the time. And so I think overall, when you think about supply chain, I think thinking about the utilization of all the existing assets is such an important part of that equation. And without, really sophisticated planning tools and being able to plan, when all the different kinds of, necessary elements are in place, it's very hard to get that utilization lever high enough to be able to kind of make the ROI make sense.
And I had just one kind of further question for you on that, which is, you're almost doing supply chain and procurement yourself in the robotic side for all of your customers. How do you think about when to buy which robots? Are you planning ahead based on what you see your customers wanting to make, or how are you thinking about the acquisition of the robots themselves?
Yeah, I think for us, what we've really focused on is creating flexibility through software. So we've built a bunch of software tools that make it so that the same robot can be repurposed for many, many different jobs. And that basically reduces our supply chain complexity significantly. That's, like one of the things we're doing. We're also, of course, for certain kind of critical components, we're keeping more things in stock and trying to be a little more proactive about demand. But it's still for us been, candidly, a big challenge because all of the components that go into kind of an automated work cell come from all over the world, and there's just a lot of unpredictability in that.
Steve, you're running supply chain for Bloom Energy. Are you a celebrity inside of the company over the past couple of years? My wife works in supply chain as well, and I feel like she used to tell people that, and they were like, oh, cool, interesting. And now they're like, oh my God, you work in supply chain. This is the most important thing. I keep reading about all of these shortages. What's the role of supply chain at Bloom kind of evolved into, and how do you see your role now?
I'm a celebrity or not, depending on who you ask, right? I lost all my hair, so probably not anymore. I think the role of supply chain, more and more, it is changing. I think this is the only org that actually impacts the top line and the bottom line of any company, right? So it is a different breed of people, from my experience, that I notice thrive in supply chain. I think strategic planning is extremely important going forward, especially post-COVID. When the entire industry is optimizing for landed costs. Previously, it was like, go get a part wherever you can find it cheaper. Like everybody ran to China or you go to Vietnam. But now, post-COVID, what you see is that getting part cheaper, the price you pay is not actually what the part costs you. Right? So more and more there is a recognition inside the companies that supply chain guys are not just guys who are just getting you parts, but actually they impact the bottom line of the company. So in that way, I guess I'm celebrity till I get a call from our CEO. Well, then I would hide.
I get to be the dumb non-supply chain person who gets to ask all of the questions up here. How do you balance, the same part that might cost 50% less, but is going to take 2 months versus something that you can get tomorrow that might be a little bit lower? Like, just can you walk us through a simple framework of how you're balancing all of these different needs in the post-COVID world?
Yeah. I think most of the supply chain guys know this. It's something called total cost of ownership. Like if you have a deal that gets the company about $30 million and you have to buy a part, you have to pay 100% more, I would definitely pay for that, because end of the day, it makes more money and the customer is happy. And sometimes the trick in this is you have to see things coming. That's where I said supply chain guys are a different breed of people. I'll give you a live example. My guy in China called me and said they are going to shut down Shenzhen tomorrow night. So I just hired a truck to take all our parts, put on a truck, and move them into Hong Kong. This guy was just driving around in Hong Kong, doing nothing. The truck was there on the road, and then later I found a ship to ship it back to the US. So the key is to understand your business, understand your supply base, and you have to sometimes do creative things like that. But definitely it all depends on the TCO, what it costs to the company.
Makes sense. How about in the aviation industry? Like in terms of the airplane, how many parts are you kind of doing totally from scratch? What are you taking off the shelf? How do you build this supply chain for a brand new plane from scratch?
Well, we're trying to build our company in such a way that we minimize what we have to put together and assemble, because that means more CapEx, more risk. We've never built these parts before when somebody else has. So for us, if we can outsource a majority of what we're doing, that's good for our model. And that's actually, to some degree, the trend that's been taking place. Boeing, as many of you may know, outsourced most of the 787. 1,800 different suppliers out there. So it's actually amazing. So for us, it's about finding suppliers who have capabilities that we don't have in carbon fiber development. Many of them now even have engineering services. And some, to my surprise, are even willing to invest in us, which is great, because they're looking to build production and they want to expand the horizon. So startups like us are an opportunity for them to do that.
And how do you have that conversation with them? Is that on your end a sales process up front to say, build for us? Or are they coming to you and saying, we've identified you as somebody that might be interesting here? we're going to build out capacity?
Well, it's funny you asked that question because I'm having that conversation tomorrow with one supplier. But you have to paint, obviously, a big vision for what we're doing and show what's in it for them. And then you just have to, it's a sales process of getting them to invest in your company. So
makes sense. And then versus Boeing's 1,800 suppliers, how many suppliers do you have?
Well, we don't. We're very early in this process. So our first prototype, you could actually count only 5 parts that we didn't build. We built the entire aircraft ourselves. So it was the tires, the engine, the avionics. I can't remember the gas tank and something else, but everything else was built internally. When we get to the production aircraft, most things will be outsourced. We'll just be doing final assembly.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess in terms of building up teams in this new environment in supply chain, and maybe Satish will think of you, are there any different skill sets you're looking for when you're growing this fast? Like, how do you think about maybe versus being in a more traditional manufacturing, building out a supply chain and procurement team within the company now?
I think ability to handle stress is the most important quality for supply chain people. I think you almost have to be shameless, I would say, to be a successful guy. But I think the skill set that we are looking for is to have the ability to have relationship with suppliers. More and more it is becoming like there is no, I wouldn't call them anybody's suppliers other than the guys who probably give us screws or nuts and bolts. It's mostly partnerships going forward, right? Actually, more and more the landscape is changing in such a way that you actually depend on your supplier more than what you can do yourself. Most of the suppliers have IPs that we don't have. Right? So the key what we look for in supply chain professionals is that the ability to foster those relationships and develop them, and also keep thinking about how they bring value to the company. It's not one set that people come with that particular skill set. It's mostly through the background and working in diverse companies helps quite a bit.
And how much, as a follow-up, do you want to train them kind of in your own, like how much do you want unmolded clay that you can come in and train as long as they are empathetic and good at working with partners, and versus how much do you want them to bring kind of a technical skill set?
I would say for strategic sourcing roles, I would say we need people who are already in that mold and have proven track record. For purchasing roles and logistic roles, so I would lean towards unmolded clay because every company is different in those roles. In purchasing roles, the systems you use are different, the tools you use are different. Logistics also is similar. But strategic sourcing, I think there is a value for people who are already like street smart and have proven their skills in the market.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think as well, to build on that, I think you can teach skills, but you can't teach passion. And when we look for people, it's not specifically, hey, have you spent 8 or 10 years in supplier management or purchasing or things of that nature. I don't really care too much about that, quite frankly. I think there's a lot of tools out there and things like that are changing the way things have done, that are being done going forward. And I think it's important to look at somebody that has a passion for the business as well and a general manager mindset. Because you need to understand the whole finance aspect of it as well. So I think it's really important to understand, how to build a return on investment kind of scenario and understand what other aspects of the business are going to be tied to that. I think it is becoming a little bit easier to bring them through supplier management now because they see a path beyond that. Before it was where everybody went to retire. So, we don't know what to do with Johnny over there. Bring him into procurement. He'll stay there for another 20 years. And I think that's changing now. And we need to make sure that does change, that there's a path forward for that, because people are not going to want to come into there, get trained, if there's no path forward. And I think there's a lot more of that. And like I said, I look for general manager type skills that, she can work on this and understand the sales side of it and so forth, and make that a career path for people as opposed to a destination before they retire.
And we were talking before about how you do this remotely. Like, what are the challenges of doing something that's very physical and building out that team in a remote way?
Yeah, so So our business is distributed in a few different locations. We have I think 6 kind of physical places, but then also a lot of our staff was hired during the pandemic, so they work remotely. So I think that there's just a lot of added communication overhead, and there's a lot of extra burden that comes from having to kind of create good systems and processes across that team. But on the other hand, I think one of the things that we've realized is it actually surfaces a lot of issues. So by forcing that degree of extra communication, it forces people to really think about what are the things that are critical for the rest of the organization to know and to distill that down. So what we found is it's actually kind of trained us in a certain level of discipline. As we bring new people on, having all of that organized and having information in a way that's easily accessible allows us to onboard people a lot more quickly. So it's been a challenge, but at the same time, I think what we found is that it's given us some superpowers.
David, I know you have a large network of manufacturing facilities distributed across the country, the globe. When you step out from the kind of startup version of distributed and remote, what does managing a team like that look like at that kind of scale across a number of different facilities? No, for David.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the audio was a little difficult. I couldn't fully understand that.
No, so I was just saying, we talk in our world and in the startup world about distributed teams and remote teams. At some point, you reach a certain scale where being distributed it's the only option. So how are you doing this across so many facilities across the country and the globe?
Yeah, sorry, that was a great question, by the way. Yeah, it's not easy. It's difficult, and I think it's changing. It's changing quite a bit now. You've seen companies say we're going to be remote forever. Some companies say we're all coming back, together and so forth. I think everybody's got sort of into this routine that every time they want to talk, they want to put a meeting together, or something like that. And some companies say you have to be on your video. Some say you don't. I don't know whether it's Big Brother. Sometimes they want everybody on video, to figure out where they're at and so on. So the thing that I mentioned before about passion, if you have passion about what you're doing, then I'm really not worried completely where you're spending your time from 9 to 5, let's say, because you're probably working hard to get, the job done. What amazes me is some of these companies that during the pandemic, and you may have experienced a lot of this, that hired all these people, never met them, still have never met them. And I'm not exactly sure how efficient all that is. I mean, I firmly believe that it made us wake up, right? Because all this Zoom and Teams and all that was all here before the pandemic. Yeah. Just that nobody adopted it, right? So, and also, I think taking new technology, as I mentioned before, and throwing at an old problem can be very expensive sometimes too. You really have to sort of gut the system sometimes to make it work. Because when you start having everybody have an opinion on something, I've said many times that you want to look at the data because you don't want opinion masquerading as fact. And then you have all these people in these meetings making these decisions. And, I said to somebody earlier that somebody said one time that a camel is a horse designed by committee. So I'm not sure you always get what you're looking for with everybody, having their own opinion and so on. Someone has to take the lead, but the distributed nature of it is still a very big challenge. And I don't think everybody has figured that out yet.
I'm going to steal the camel and horse line from you. That's very good. Paul, the second time around building an aviation startup, what's been the most surprising about kind of like the early stages of procurement for the company? And then what are the things that you're taking from your past and not making those same mistakes again?
Well, the first startup was Exojet, and in that case, the procurement was pretty simple, but very difficult. We were buying airplanes at $22 million a copy, so I had to come up with just gobs and tons of money to make that happen. And I think we ordered 80 aircraft, over $1 billion of equipment. It was like every week we had delivery on an airplane. I'm like, oh my God, another $22 million. So this is quite a different problem. Yeah. It's at the other end of the spectrum. It's lots and lots and lots of small parts that all have to come in at the same time. And are thankfully a lot cheaper, but in this particular case, we're raising a lot more money to design the aircraft, and that's the expensive part of this proposition. So that's the juxtaposition between the two.
Makes a lot of sense. Satish, how about you? What's been the most surprising piece of your new role in procurement there?
I think tier 3 suppliers can get you. That's the most surprising thing I found during COVID. We had this amazing patented connector, costs about $150,000. And we couldn't get that supply because the resin that is used to make one of the pins comes out of China, and nobody could get it. So never paid attention to tier 3, tier 4 suppliers. Now we are paying attention to that. That's the most surprising thing I found. Always, every supply chain I worked, like 25 years, always tuned towards tier 1, of course, and maybe a little bit of tier 2 if we thought critical, but didn't know you had to go a couple of layers more. That was really eye-opening for me.
That makes sense. Saman, you've come from the wonderful and lazy world of investing, which I love to be in, to the world of actually building things. What's been the most surprising for you on the procurement side?
There's so much. I don't know how to answer that one. I think as a venture capitalist, when we were investing in technology companies, I think you have the luxury of looking at things a little bit from a distance and looking across industries to find trends. And there's a lot of kind of fun around that. But as a bunch of supply chain professionals know much better than me, really it's the details that'll kill you. And so it's easy to kind of theorize about what might or might not work. But at the end of the day, if you're missing the resin on one pin, all the grandest plans in the world aren't going to save you. And so I think kind of moving from the world of software and that kind of technology into the world of hardware and robotics and manufacturing, that's been something that we've had to kind of really level up. Luckily, I think there's a lot of tools out there that make it a lot easier for people who don't have years and years and years of experience doing that. But building the ability to plan, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months into the future. We have to stock spare parts for every single one of our robots and provide maintenance and, degrease and, all the things that are related to that. They add up over time.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think what surprised me a little bit, getting back into the supply chain world, is really the lack of preparation from a lot of the commercial teams of the suppliers, to be quite honest with you. When I had my own business, and one of my largest customers was Clorox, and I would listen to their quarterly call, right, every quarter, and I would go in after that, and I knew way more than any employee even knew there about their own company. They don't even listen to their own quarterly conference calls about what's happening. They would talk about the future, where it's going. And then you could listen to competitors' calls and understand that. There's so much information out there that they could be bringing us or understand about our business for a competitive advantage. In fact, I would be, at this point, if I was selling to these major multinational companies, they'll all be adopting something like the Arkestro platform, in time for sure. And there's discussions about how auctions work, how predictive procurement works, and so on. I'd be studying all that now so that I could beat it and I could win it. And it's not something that you can game, but it's something that you can understand and maybe benefit from. So I don't understand, quite frankly. I think there's a whole myriad of folks out there. There's the old school folks that are maybe calling on you, the folks that are much more tech savvy and so on. But I'm really surprised how unprepared a lot of the folks are when you have a major bid out there or something and they believe they're just going to sort of show up and win it. It really surprises me.
It comes back to your passion point once again. If you show up prepared and proactive,
they're probably going to leave and go somewhere else. They're not committed to the organization, and that makes it's a big difference between when you're either committed or you're just involved. There's a major difference.
Absolutely. And you walked yourself right into the next question, which is, if you had a crystal ball and you want to look out over the next decade, what technological trends do you think are going to have the biggest impact and will cause the biggest surprise over the next decade for people working in supply chain and procurement?
Yeah, my answer might surprise maybe some people. I think the technological trends are here right now. I think we haven't caught up to them. So to ask for what the next thing is, that's great. But the stuff that's here right now will keep all of us busy for 10 years. And I think will be sufficient. Don't get me wrong, the improvements we're always looking for. But if you take a look at the adoption rate for a lot of these technologies, very, very, very slow. And that's another surprise point for me, where you look at what we're talking about here today, and the business use case is incredible. It's there. So what I'm not sure about is, are the people in our roles not selling that in the proper fashion to the CFO or something? Because, the investment there is extremely clear. There's very few types of areas of a business where you can go in and actually put dollars and cents on something for sure. You spend this much money, this is how much it will get you back. So that part of it is, incredible. I don't have a crystal ball to say what the next thing's going to be, but I will say that there's enough there right now to keep us busy and prosperous and competitive for the next 8 to 10 years. I'm
going to keep picking on you. What do you think is one that you just scratch your head when you're like, why we have this thing? Why are people not adopting this?
And what is that one thing?
What is that one thing that right now, yeah?
Yeah, no, I do think that one thing really is understanding a lot of times there's a lot of human or manual things that are done in the organization. And I think that has a lot to do with turnover and so on and so forth. But I do not understand why folks aren't looking for ways to enhance their productivity, because we have to do more with less, right? Our biggest challenge always is we can't add a lot of people. Right? And I think partnering with suppliers, and I think someone mentioned here earlier that how much we rely on our suppliers. And when we start talking about carbon emissions and things like that, I think there was a study done by McKinsey or something, and 96% of all the carbon emissions are coming from your supplier. And that was actually Flex that came up with that as well, a large contract manufacturer. So a lot of things I think we can do with our suppliers, and we really have to respect that. This is not a win-lose type of arrangement. I really think it needs to be a lot more collaborative, and I don't think we spend enough time doing that.
I think the biggest challenge is adoption of the technology, right? Like every place you see, like there are 3 stages. First is they go into denial that we have a problem. Then there is anger. Then finally they come to a state where they realize, yes, we do really have a problem. I mean, in the previous sessions also, people were talking, everybody uses Excel. But nobody asked the question, why do they use Excel? Right? Yeah, you have these fantastic platforms. I invested in multiple platforms before, but nobody uses. I think generally people are comfortable using Excel because that's their go-to. They've grown up with it. And it gives them the answers they want because they can manipulate the data whichever way they want to see. I think the biggest challenge going forward is how do we make the professionals and industry adapt platforms like Arkestro. It could be there is support from the top, but if there is no ground level support, I don't think it'll be successful. And that is the biggest drawback I see today in the industry.
And how do you think about doing that within your own organization, pushing adoption of software that people might be less comfortable with, but will be better for the business?
I think we have to show value and how it will provide that value to them. Like we have to break this down into pieces, right? There is generally a common convention, okay, another software on top. People don't have really good experience with Oracles of the world or SAPs of the world. Let's be honest here, right? It always is passed down onto them and say, you have to use Oracle, we use Oracle. And it's the most inflexible tool I've ever seen in my life, I will admit. Right? Anything you touch, they want $2 million to change something in there. So the value is in these platforms to show these companies that in small chunks, let's not go solve world hunger, but show in small chunks like, okay, here is 10% improvement in your workload. Here is 5% savings. I liked especially what we showed this morning. I think small increments become tangible over a period of time. There is no one answer. There's no silver bullet. It's keep at it, and perseverance is most important, and you keep going at the problem till it is solved. I think eventually people will turn around and start believing in the tool. Just like I never switched to Apple phone till I used iPhone. I was always a BlackBerry guy. I hated iPhone, so same thing.
That's why I'm still an Excel guy.
Yeah, I would just add for just one quick thing. As you talked about going forward, I think it's all about any tool needs to be intuitive, right? People want to, they're used to picking up the iPhone and there's no manual. So anything that happens, I think, needs to be intuitive. And when we look at the growth of Instagram and things like that, people want to see pictures. They don't want to read things. And I think we have to realize that, and we can't resist that and move into that. And I think the ones that are going to be successful are the ones that are easy to use and that you can adopt, and a supplier doesn't have to learn a new language, like you said. And if it's similar to Excel, that's fine. Because everybody talks about, oh, geez, I can't believe we're still using Excel. It's a heck of a tool. but it needs to be used in the right place, and don't have somebody relearn a brand new system. So it's all, I think, about intuitiveness.
Makes sense. Paul, is there something that you're waiting for that you just can't wait over the next decade? You need somebody to build to help you making airplanes easier, or is it really about executing on the things that you have already?
Well, I'm a little bit fortunate because most of aerospace is what I need is here in the United States, my engines, my avionics, and all that kind of stuff. But I spent a number of years at the State Department dealing with supply chains, listening to companies come in and tell horror stories of putting a factory in some foreign country and then discovering that a factory opened up right across the street making parts and products almost identical to theirs. I mean, this happens all over the place. So what I think is going to be sort of interesting over the next 10 years is this whole process of decoupling, where there's an enormous amount of potential political risk associated with buying products through various different countries. China, for example, none of us buy anything from North Korea, but imagine that if you did, right? But there are other parts of the world, Ukraine, Russia, parts of Africa, where there is, and particularly China, there's so much dependency of different products between these two huge economies that I think a lot of companies are going to get caught in the buzzsaw of what is called decoupling, and I think that's going to start to happen over the next 10 years.
What should they do about it now to start getting ahead of it?
Looking for second source of many of your products, looking to see if there are any products that are single sourced in China, and making sure you have a second source for that somewhere else outside of that political world. A lot of our pharmaceutical agents and reagents and so forth are sole sourced out of China. A lot of our antibiotics come out of China. And if something were to happen, if Xi Jinping were to go into Taiwan, all of that could get cut off, and you could have huge shortages of various different products throughout the Western world. So I think there's a huge amount of risk and thought, and potentially that's an area technology can help us with as well.
Speaking of which, Saman, as we bring jobs and manufacturing back to the U.S., what do you see as the things that are going to help the most in the next 10 years to ease that transition when we're already in a labor shortage? I'm not trying to softball robots. Other than robots, like what else are you seeing here?
Yeah, I was definitely going to answer with robots. I think when you look at, I saw an interesting stat that like America right now is experiencing the kind of most rapid industrialization that it's ever had since World War II. And I think a lot of it is due to these issues that you're talking about around kind of supply chain uncertainty. I think the thing that we need, in addition to large numbers of robots, is I think we need really, really good kind of training programs for that process of reindustrialization. I think there's a shortage of talent kind of across the spectrum in manufacturing, from process engineers to procurement folks to people who know how to manage a warehouse, right? There's kind of every factory is going to need to increase their complexity multiple fold. And in order to do that, I think the biggest shortage is good training and good talent.
It is amazing. I ask a question about technology in the next decade, and really the answer feels like it's a very human one. It's about adopting the things we have now, about training the people, and about people getting prepared. So I think that's a great place to end it. This panel was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for answering my questions, and thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you.